In this module, we're going to learn how to configure the firewall rules and groups. The module goals of what you will learn in this particular module are that we will identify the purpose of firewall rules and groups. We'll distinguish between the settings for firewall rules and groups. We will identify the considerations for the rule design. We will identify the purpose of location awareness, connection isolation, and time groups. We will also describe the best practices for firewall configuration and rule design. And we will configure the firewall rules and groups to meet the customer requirements. The key features of the rules and groups are the fact that rules determine how to handle the network traffic when it comes to and from your different computer. Each rule provides a set of conditions that the traffic must meet and an action to allow or block the traffic. When the firewall finds that traffic matches that particular rule's conditions, it performs the associated action of allow or block. ENS includes predefined rules, but also supports the ability to create custom rules. When creating your custom rules, you can define the rules very broadly, like all IP traffic, or very narrow, where a specific application or service. The rules are grouped logically for simplified management. You can group the rules according to a work function, a service, an application, or anything that you need for easier management. Like the rules, you can define the rule groups by network, transport, application, schedule, and location options. This figure illustrates how rules work. Rules are processed from top down until there's a match. After there's a match, the rule criteria is applied. If there isn't a match, then what it will do is it will continue to go through the rules until it finds a match. If there's not a match, then it will automatically apply a block rule. Ideally, what you should do is place your more specific rules at the top and more general rules at the bottom of your rules policy. The default policies that we have for you in EPO for the rules are that you have always the McAfee default with your duplicate of the McAfee default called the My Default. We also created a specific McAfee default server rule policy that you can use that is ideally used for more servers, and it has some rules in there that are more configured for types of communication that servers may need to use. User-based policies for the firewall allows you to be able to define firewall policies that are defined for specific users or the groups that they belong to with Active Directory or LDAP. What you have to do is you have to register your LDAP server and then configure the policy assignment rules according to those particular user accounts or users or group accounts. What happens is when a person logs in, it will be enforced on that client for that user at that time. With the location that the machine is in the system tree will not be applied. Basically, it will be enforced anytime we have a user with that matching assignment rule. If you have where I have two or more users that are actually logged on to a particular machine, then the system-based policy will be the policy that will be enforced. Just understand that the policy assignment rules will always take precedence over policies that are defined in the system tree unless the person does not have that policy assignment rules. An overview of the firewall rules page design is the fact that, first off, on the far left-hand side, you'll have the different unique names having to do with the firewall group or the firewall rule. Then you have the status that shows is it enabled or disabled. You'll have the colors of green if it's allowed, red if it's blocked, and then you have the direction. You have in, out, or either. You'll have a listing of a remote port if that does apply. You'll also have the option of what application does it apply to, and this has to do with Windows only. And then over at the far right hand side, you either have the option of only being able to view the policy or the rule by clicking the view and it's read only, or I can edit the particular rule, or I can add it to the catalog, and later on you'll see where I can also select remove dependency on the catalog. When you're looking at the pre-configured rules and groups that we have configured within these policies, if you'll notice, you have these little arrows. When you click on the arrows, you can collapse or expand to see what is the particular rule set that's within that rule group. Notice we have read-only groups like the McAfee core networking that we want to make sure that you do have those rules set so that you will always be able to communicate with the EPO server. You'll see some of them that we have that has to do with ePolicy Orchestrator server, some basic networking, and so on. Some of the rules that we have are automatically organized within the groups, and as you notice in this screen, some are not. If you recall, I've mentioned to you before the Firewall Catalog. And the Firewall Catalog is where we can go in and we can add any new types of definitions. We can reference the existing definitions, or I can import and export more items. You also have the ability to choose the columns as to what you want to show within this particular catalog. And just understand, if I add an item to the catalog while creating the firewall rule or group, all the properties are inherited from the parent in a top-down manner. Now, you can break the inheritance from your rule to this Firewall Catalog. The Firewall Catalog is designed to simplify the process of you having to create firewall rules and groups. The idea is the fact that I can go in and use a firewall rule builder or firewall group builder, and all I have to do is select Add from Catalog, and that is where I can browse and select whatever item I want from the catalog. When I reference an item catalog, I create a dependent link between it and the firewall rule group. So I can go back and I can change that item in the catalog, and when I do that, it also changes it in any policy that has that particular rule associated with that particular item. If you'll recall, I mentioned you can remove the dependency by breaking the link within the policy. All you have to do, if you'll notice here where it says break catalog inheritance, and then no longer are you dependent on any of the changes that are in the catalog. The Firewall Catalog that is found in EPO under Policy includes all the previously added firewall rules and firewall group items. You can add items individually to the catalog by linking them from the firewall and the rule groups. You can also import the items from an XML format, exports of any other rules policies. The McAfee Core Networking group contains the core networking rules provided by McAfee and includes the rules to allow the McAfee applications and the DNS traffic. You cannot change or delete these rules. You can disable the group in the firewall options, but doing so might disrupt your network communications on the client. All the other types of rules within here is ARP, the Bootstrap protocol where you have BOOTP. As you see, the domain name system, your extensible authentication protocol, and your internet control message, your ICMP protocol. The applications that are digitally signed by McAfee are also added. So the idea is if it is a signed application, then we automatically associate that with our particular firewall rule because it says this is an application that is a McAfee application because it has been signed with our certificate and it's automatically allowed. We have a group that has all the ePolicy Orchestrator rules associated with the communication that you do have to have for EPO. You have everything having to do with Apache and Tomcat, Event Parser, and the SQL Server. The thing that I do want to point out to you is this is set for all of the default rules. You may want to make sure that, for example, where it says Allow ePolicy Orchestrator Console, that is an allow out rule, and that is for specifically the EPO server. So what you want to do is make sure that if you did not use port 8443, that you actually create a rule that or edit this rule so that you add the actual port that you did set on your specific EPO server. We have a rule group that has to do with your basic networking. This is required. If you'll notice, you have allow certain authentication, your BOOTP, your DNS, your network time traffic. These are very important so that your system can actually be communicating with your network and not have that be disabled, such as getting the right DNS resolved so I can actually log into Active Directory. Okay. So we do have the default port assignments assigned to these particular protocols. We have two rule groups that are defined for VPN and your ICMP. Normally these are the most common communication that most of our customers just have to have so that they can have where their end users can actually connect up through VPN, and also maybe they might need to be able to ping something to make sure that they actually see the network. We do have some customers who do not want to allow ping on their network or ICMP. We have configured a Windows AD authentication rule group that has all of the most common rules that allow outgoing LDAP traffic over TCP and UDP, as well as any incoming and outgoing server message block traffic. All of the default parts are used for this particular communication. The NetBIOS rule group allows for basic networking input and output of all system traffic that allows your NetBIOS services and sessions. The Web FTP group includes rules that allows for normal outgoing FTP communication and outbound hypertext transfer protocol, your HTTP, and any of your HTTPS communication. The mail client group also has rules that allows your most common POP3 communication, also your IMAP and your SNMP. If any of these rules do not comply within your company policies, then it is recommended that you go in and change these instead of them being allowed out, that you actually block these. We have a network tools group, and the rules that are associated with this allow any remote desktop protocol connections. This is widely used for remote support, so that's why we have this selected so that you can use this RDP traffic. The default port is 3389. Once again, if you're not allowing any remote desktop, you may want to customize these particular rules to block the RDP connections. Some miscellaneous traffic rules that we have are your normal little SNMP, so we can allow the managers to deliver any notification statistics over a designated port. So this rule prevents from your normal SNMP traffic from being blocked. We also have the allow all outbound traffic on high UDP ports. There are many applications that use high UDP ports, and this rule prevents them from being blocked. The allow loopback local traffic makes sure that if you have a loopback firewall rule that you might have to have, the communication that has to do with the loopback adapter is used by many of client VPNs and other types of applications on the clients. Lots of times you really need to have this allow loopback rule above any location aware rule groups, which we're going to talk about more later on. For creating any types of rules within your firewall rules policy is first make sure that you don't already have a rule for that particular rule. Otherwise, I can click Add Rule, type in a name, specify the status, the default is Enabled, specify your actions, the default is Allow, specify your direction, the default is Either, specify your network protocol, the default is IPv4, then you specify the connection type, is it wired, wireless, and virtual, and then you can specify the network if you need to. It could be local or remote. Then specify your transport protocol, the default is all protocols, and optionally then you can specify the applications And if you want, you can also configure a schedule that is enabled for only Windows machines. And when you're specifying the schedule, you can say when does it start, when does it end, and the days of the week. In designing rules, things that you have to think about is that if you're blocking inbound, it works very well for desktops and laptops. It gives a lot of protection, pretty easy to write and maintain, and unlikely to break any of your applications. But if you're trying to block both inbound and outbound, generally this is a lot harder to write. You never know when you're actually completed. Very difficult to maintain. It might break a new application, but it does provide a significant level of protection. The workflow for creating groups within your ENS Firewall Rules policy is you click Add Rule or Add Group. You type in a name, specify the status, specify the actions, select your direction. Then you have, do you want to enable location awareness, which we're going to discuss next, which is optional. Then you define the network protocol, the connection type. You can also specify the network. Is it local or remote? Specify your transport protocol. And also you can specify any other applications. And then once again, you can configure the schedule, which is for Windows only. The overview of the location awareness is the fact that you can manage rules that apply only when you connect to a network using a wired connection, a wireless connection, or a non-specific connection that has a particular criteria. In addition, these groups are network adapter aware, so that computers with multiple network interfaces can have rules apply that are adapter specific. How the location awareness works is you can have several types of firewall groups that I can manage the rules that apply when I connect to a specific network. Thing is for example, in this one, I can have a rule group that says if you're connected on the intranet, I can be very open with my different firewall rules because we have probably a perimeter firewall that can control your different connectivity, and you can have an actual gateway. Then I can also have a second set of firewall rules that has to do with the fact that I'm connecting to the corporate network using the VPN. So I can have a little slightly more strict set of rules that can be placed having to do with the fact that the person is outside the company network, but they are coming and connecting up through our VPN. Then I can have another set that applies, that is an overall rule set that has to do with the fact that the user is outside the corporate network. They're out there. They're not even connecting into the VPN. They're not anywhere near connecting to our corporate network. And I have all the default rules that I want to be very restrictive on their particular type of communication. So that could be the outside world where it's very restrictive on the inbound. I can limit access to external addresses and ports. And then a little catch-all that blocks all solicited inbound traffic. Guidelines for the location awareness are that the fact is you can select, first off, enable connection isolation. One use of this option is to block traffic that is generated by potentially undesirable sources outside the corporate network from entering the corporate network. So an idea is if I have where a computer that has two types of connections, like the wireless and the wired, I can actually have where I say enable connection isolation, and basically what it will do is I cannot use the second NIC that is on my system to connect to any type of network. Now, because it does not have the criteria that we have that identifies it on this network. You do require that the McAfee ePolicy server is reachable, and the idea is the fact that you do want to make sure that your machine can actually talk to your ePolicy server. The location criteria all comes down to everything having to do with the connection-specific DNS suffix, what is the default gateway, what is your DHCP server, the DNS server, your primary wins, secondary wins, can you reach the domain, and you can also use a registry key. Just understand, if you have any of these conditions assigned, they are an AND condition. So that means all of those conditions must match. I do want to mention that you can actually have multiple definitions within a condition, such as the connection-specific DNS suffix. I could have several DNS suffixes listed in there, and those are all OR conditions. How does the connection isolation work? Well, the idea is what we do is you have traffic that's coming along and it's being communicated to and from your machine. When this happens, it looks to see, is connection isolation enabled for a particular group? Then it will look to see, does that network interface card actually match that group criteria? If it does, then it will process the traffic that is in that group. If it does not match it, then it will basically prevent it from going out the other NIC. So let's just kind of go through this again. I have a laptop. My laptop has a wired connection, which I came in, plugged it into the company network, and I'm noticing that I cannot get to certain websites. So what I do is I decide, well, oh, you know what, there's one of those little coffee cafe little places there's right next to my building, and I can actually, my wireless can actually connect up to that little wireless network. So I'm thinking, well, I'll just connect up to that and see if I can get to that website. Well, if you have connection isolation enabled, what will happen is you have traffic that I'm trying to do outside on that wireless network, and what it will say is, no, I'm sorry, this NIC does not match the group criteria, and so what I will do is, in effect, totally block the traffic that's going in and out of that wireless network. And the only connection you can use is your wired network. And so here's two settings that we want you to think about when you're creating a connection isolation. I have a corporate environment and a hotel. I can actually have an active firewall rule list that will have all the rules in this order. Rules for basic connection, my VPN connection rules, and my group with corporate LAN connection rules, and a group with VPN connection rules. Now, the connection rules will be processed until all the group with the corporate LAN connection rules is encountered. It looks at the settings. It sees, hey, connection type is wired. The DNS suffix is mycompany.com. What's the default gateway? And we have enabled the connection isolation. So we have both of these wireless in your LAN network connections. I connect to my corporate network. My wireless is still active. I connected a hotspot, but I got blocked. We have a feature called timed groups. With the timed groups, you can create a firewall group with certain settings that allows like internet connectivity. For example, we have here allow port 80 HTTP traffic. You can go in and click disable schedule and enable this group from the McAfee system icon. Then you put in what is the number of minutes that the group is enabled, and you have 1 to 60. Then I can also create a connection isolation group that matches my VPN network to allow all the necessary traffic. And so what happens is then the end user, if they need to be able to use HTTP so they can connect up to the VPN, they'll be able to enable that rule. It's only enabled for 60 minutes, and then they can actually communicate through VPN. In this section, we're going to talk about 3 different types of use cases for creating custom rules. One will be using different port than the default. Another one is allowing traffic for third-party applications, and the last one is allowing ping to see if a port is open or blocked. In our first custom use case, The requirements are that we want to allow computers to access the corporate network with wired connections and access outside the office with wireless. Otherwise, we want to block all other traffic that is not through the corporate network. How would you configure the group? Well, you can configure the group as follows. The connection type is wired. You set your connection-specific DNS suffix as mycompany.com. You can select your default gateway, and you enable the location awareness and connection isolation. So my computer has both LAN and wireless network adapters. The computer connects up to the corporate network on a wired connection, however the wireless interface is still active. So it connects to that hotspot outside the office. The computer connects to both networks because the rules for basic access are at the top of the firewall's rules list. The wired LAN connection is active and meets the criteria of the corporate LAN group. The firewall processes the traffic through the LAN, but because of the connection isolation is enabled, all other traffic not through the LAN is blocked. Our second use case is a scenario where I want to allow guests to set up an account for wireless internet. I want to make sure the accounts are timed where they can only use it allowing during the guest stay. Otherwise, I can block all other network access, whether it's wired or wireless. How would you configure this group? I can configure the group where you set the connection type as virtual. I select the connection-specific DNS suffix. I set the IP address for our company. I can set the location awareness and connection isolation and select that where it's enabled. And then I can use general connection rules to allow the setup of the timed account at the hotel to gain the internet access. Use my VPN connection rules, allow the connection and use of the VPN tunnel. And after it's established, the VPN client will create a virtual adapter that will match with our criteria of the VPN group. The only traffic the firewall will allow inside the VPN tunnel and the basic traffic is on the actual adapter. Attempts by other hotel guests to gain access to the computer over network, either wired or wireless, will be blocked. The best practices in creating your firewall rules are: first, identify what traffic types are allowed, as well as are they allowed to access our internal resources only. Try to use our simplified default firewall policy rule templates as a baseline for you to start. The firewall is considered a stateful firewall, which reduces the need for excessive inbound firewall rules. Our policies can be more simplified. The firewall state table dynamically stores information about all active outbound traffic connections from your system. The firewall state table rules, filters, and allows the associated return traffic. This negates the need to define large, complex inbound rule sets. Using the location-aware groups further defines your rule sets for remote users that are not on your normal network. Using the rule sets can be configured within a location-aware group, which enables remote users to connect if they're using the company VPN and then utilize the normal firewall rules. Specify your defined networks as well as your exceptions that are safe for communication. Defined networks can include individual IP addresses or ranges of IP addresses. Just remember, this is only a Microsoft Windows client feature. Specify your trusted executables that are safe and have no known vulnerabilities. Use adaptive mode temporarily on a small number of systems to aid in your firewall rules tuning. Review your client adaptive rules daily or at minimum weekly. Some network traffic related to applications might not be recognized by firewall adaptive mode, and you might have to configure those firewall rules manually. Be sure to consult with your application vendor for information on application-specific firewall configurations to ensure your functionality. Check your understanding. Multiple choice, choose the correct answer. In which order are firewall rules processed to filter incoming packets? Is it top to bottom? Bottom to top? A combination of the most severe rules? a combination of the least severe rules. If you answered top to bottom, then you are correct. The firewall rules in this policy apply as all standard firewall policies and firewall products do exist, always top to bottom. Check your understanding, multiple choice, choose the correct answer. Which firewall rule group option blocks connections except for those matching a selected network traffic? Is it A, unbridged traffic, B, network quarantine, C, connection isolation, or D, network seclusion? The answer would be connection isolation. The key points of this module are: firewalls provide a set of conditions that traffic must meet and an action to allow or block the traffic. The ENS product includes predefined rules and also supports custom rules. When creating custom rules, you can define rules broadly, all IP traffic, or be very narrow. It's this specific application or service. We do group the rules logically, so that makes it for its easier management. Location-aware groups let you manage rules that apply only when you connect to a network using a wired connection, a wireless connection, or a non-specific connection with a particular criteria. The connection isolation is used to block traffic generally generated by potentially undesirable sources outside the corporate network. You can use the time groups to restrict internet access until a system connects over VPN.